Hey y'all, it's Rick here with Uncommon Communion with you recording on almost midnight on the cusp between Tuesday and Wednesday. I am recording at the end of a very long day, so I'm going to keep this short. And I am recording because, again, I am just feeling kind of too tired to write. I do think, though, that what I want to share tonight probably is conveyed better by speaking rather than writing. Regardless, I am glad that you are here today as we celebrate, affirm, uphold, acknowledge, and live from the reality that we are always and everywhere in the holy presence of the more and each other. So, after a number of weeks of being away, I attended something that I've shared about here numerous times before. It's called Whole Heart Tuesday, and it is a little group from the of folks, um, including the pastor from the church where I worship, and we have kind of done different things with this. It's basically kind of a book study, a conversation for about 90 minutes on Tuesdays. We are reading from a book that I'll put a link to here in the notes. It's called Black Liturgies, and the author is Cole Arthur Riley. I think I got that right. I didn't write it down, but I believe that's their name. And it is, as it sounds, liturgies, prayers on various themes. And Tuesday evening, the theme was artistry. And we were talking about some different things. And eventually the conversation got around to how are memorials being told? And by that, I mean locations in the US, that's what most of us are most familiar with, of course. How are locations where important events, tragedies, whether it was battlefields like Gettysburg or the site of Flight 93 in Pennsylvania, those types of places, how are they being remembered? In what type of artistry, right? Images, symbols, and so forth are being used to tell those stories so that we today and future generations can remember what happened there and tragedies. Hopefully, we can prevent those somehow, in some ways, in the future. So the conversation got around to talking about Kent State. Now, you may know I live in Columbus, Ohio. Kent State is up closer to Cleveland. My oldest child graduated from Kent State University, so I have some familiarity with that university and that town. It's a really cool little town and a kind of a pretty, sort of a unique little pocket of Ohio that if you're not familiar with, you've never checked it out, highly recommend it. Cuyahoga National Park is up in that neck of the woods. So, Kent State, as you may remember, is the site on March 4th, 1970, that four students were murdered, shot, really a massacre by National Guard troops. And we were talking about how that the story is told there in the museum and on the grounds. And one of the ways that it is told is a number of those students who died in the parking lot, and the parking lot is still there. That's where their bodies fell, and they are memorialized with a little sort of perpetual flame and a marker that really kind of seals off a space where they had their last breath. So it's quite powerful. And we were talking, and one of the individuals, a gentleman in the group, a little older than I am, because I was only months old on January of, or excuse me, May of 1970. He was talking about when he was a student at Ohio State and the protests there, the anti-war protests, both before Kent State and then also after the massacre. And he had an amazing story about being on campus that day of the protest. I guess it was a nationwide action, and he saw spray painted somewhere on the ground on a sidewalk in red paint that it said "4 dead." And, he had thought that it was there on the OSU campus, and later on found out that it was Kent State. And he described something that made me think of where we are in this moment right now with resistance and protest. It was the image, and he said he witnessed this, saw people doing this, which I think is pretty cool, of what used to be called flower power, right? There was this idea of, like, flowers, and if you have ever seen Hair, the musical, Age of Aquarius, and so forth, right? But that image of protesters, resistors, putting flowers literally into the barrel of National Guard guns. And I'll put into the chat one of the most famous photos, one of the most iconic photos of that action. And it kind of made me think about symbols and resistance and nonviolence. It also brought to mind a song that, again, I'm going to put a lot here in the notes today, but a song by a favorite artist of mine, Michael Franti, and it's called Flower in the Gun. And I really recommend that you listen to it, and especially watch this video, because it has a number of, quite a few images of real folks who survived themselves or lost, in some cases, family members to gun violence, right? And he is saying, Franti in the song says, we can be the flower in the gun. We can be the healers. We can be the ones who are ending this, right? And this song came out 6 years ago. So it was, and you'll see the theme is primarily gun violence and the number of Americans who die each day, around 100 of gun violence. So I was thinking, again, as planetary pilgrims on the way of Christ during this crisis moment where death and cruelty and violence is being used as a tool of repression, a tool of fear, a tool of fascist authoritarianism, how do we resist? And I love the symbolism that we have already seen. The pictures, and I'll try to put one of these into the chat, the pictures of the inflatable costumes, people in those costumes standing in front of National Guard and ICE thugs in protest, right? And what an image of our times. The question, though, is what are the next images, right? What are the next icons, the next symbols, the next way that we can show our resistance, not passively, right? Remember, Gandhi said nonviolent resistance is not passive. Sometimes it looks passive. You literally lay down and, in front of to stop traffic, or to, stop a vehicle, something like that, right? You put yourself at risk, and you are laying down literally. But other times it is active, right? It is actively doing something, standing there with a flower, placing it in a gun, standing there in an inflatable dinosaur costume, showing the folly and the insanity and the contrast in that image of heavily militarized, masked thugs standing against peaceful protesters in unicorn outfits. I mean, it just shows the ridiculousness of it. So again, I encourage you on this day, or as this day ends, the 11th, Veterans Day, and now it is the 12th as I record this, and when you see this, to just pray for peace and to work for peace, and to know that peace is not just the cessation of violence, that's part of it, but it's also the justice that we need to work for, right? And the ways that we can put our bodies, that we can put symbols like flowers into guns, or dinosaur and costumes in front of iced thugs. What does that look like? And how do we do that? And most importantly, where do we get the strength to do that? From each other, of course, from the power of God, from the power of the more, and I think from the power of our ancestors, people that have done this before, whose stories we can learn, whose prayers we can pray. who we can connect with and walk in their footsteps. I picked up a book off my shelf, this little book, Earth Prayers, and wanted to end with a prayer from this book. And this is from, it's Ojibwe, which is an indigenous people. I believe it's in the plains parts, the Great Plains of the United States, or maybe the Pacific Northwest. I'm sorry I didn't look this up ahead of time, but I will afterwards. And this is the prayer. Grandfather, look at our brokenness. We know that in all of creation, only the human family has strayed from the sacred way. We know that we are the ones who are divided, and we are the ones who must come back together to walk in the sacred way. Grandfather, Sacred One, teach us love, compassion, and honor, that we may heal the earth and heal each other. I just want to add to this, may we be the flower in the gun, all guns, all types of violence. May we resist in a way that captures attention and imagination and hearts and minds and builds this cause, not just for democracy, much bigger than that, for justice and for peace. All right, y'all. I'm getting some sleep here. Blessing and good. Be bold. Be well.